Welcome to the Interzone, a show about the Microsoft 365 Intelligent Intranet. I'm Mark Cashman, here with my co-host Chris, who has in his past worked in a small and medium business, McNulty.
Well, thanks, Mark. Today, we're going to catch up with John Orton. He's the director of Microsoft 365 Marketing. He's focused on our small and medium-sized business outreach.
We cover some of the recent small business innovation and some of the most common scenarios that we prepare for and, of course, react to and build our products for in Microsoft 365 to offer to businesses with fewer than about 25 people. Even though it's not an exact science, it really is targeting optimizing Microsoft 365 for small and medium businesses.
You know, it's a really interesting topic. When we think about how small businesses work, it's a great proving ground for us. I think it's for a couple of reasons. One is that most small businesses have a really large proportion of external relationships that are essential to them. You know, a 10,000 person firm obviously has external relationships, but there's such substance in that workforce that there's a lot they can do on their own. But a 5-person operation frequently has lots of vendors and external contacts that they need to integrate, but frequently without the benefit of like a disciplined, organized IT, security, and remote connection team.
And oftentimes those roles are outsourced, whether it's IT or just other parts of the business where they aren't under the same exact name umbrella, but they really operate as a virtual team.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, back in the mid-90s, I had an extremely small consulting practice. The only direct employee was me. I had about 4 subcontractors. It was before there even was a SharePoint. So, of course, we were running publicly on front page, the antecedent to much of what became SharePoint later on.
Yeah.
But the funny thing is, like, it's that business, Hurricane Systems, I still have, domain names and logos for it. So occasionally in demos, it's sort of my personal Contoso, if you will.
I like that. Maybe we can put that into our blog when we publish this episode, if you'll be so kind to lend the logo.
Yes.
That'd be fun. So you have experience of being a small business owner. I have more been on the employee side of it. In college, for a couple of years, I was a scuba instructor. It's a very small operation. There were just 4 of us. One was the owner and 3 other instructors. There's always the element of, what really do you need the software for? And now knowing more about what maybe was a little bit of a challenge, even though you assume that's just how it is, could have been a lot easier. And for a business that's pervasive, growing and augmenting, with different vendors and partners coming in, I can translate, I think, a little bit of my experience in what I think our customers are now doing that are on that smaller side, especially smaller to growing. Doesn't need to be a component, but certainly in the upscaling in terms of size of employees, that is something that we can think of the scale of the cloud supporting really well. But when it is intended to be small and remain small and have a lot at their fingertips, I think it's really interesting to translate any job that you've had. And then, we'll talk about it here in a second. What are the unique offerings for small business? But what would you say in your small business past was the most unique thing that was a challenge and maybe something that was a real benefit of being smaller?
Well, certainly being small gives you agility because you need it, because you sort of need to stay hungry to be able to go from one customer to the next. But as we were growing, I'd say our biggest challenge wasn't on core productivity, but on now described as team productivity. And specifically, who's going to see which clients on what day and what do they need to do for each of those clients? Because that was incredibly ad hoc. It was living in email. Shares were in email because we didn't have a central cloud or even a central data server to plug into for the first year or 2 there. Being able to keep a team productive required incredible attention and communication. And there's better ways of doing it now. I'm some ways envious of people who have a similar footprint. Some of the tools that we brought forward in the past few years for small businesses, there's tools that we have that we made available through our Small Business Solutions Guide. That's a URL that we can put in the show. But Mark, I know you've gone through the guide. What are some of the solutions that we have now that would be helpful for small businesses?
The one that comes first to mind is the one that's called Microsoft Bookings, which is more for the small business, or really anybody who is wanting to make it easy for customers to be able to book appointments. And it is external facing. It's something that you manage. It's as if you're managing your calendar for either one person or whomever will be taking the appointments. And it makes it real easy for people to be able to submit. They'll be able to see the open times, be able to submit and then commit that to a calendar. And then, of course, it gives them the ability to put it on their own calendar as the customer. But the bookings offering is something that's web-based, easy to manage, and it's a unique part of it. It's really kind of outside of the core of our applications, which maybe talk about in a second. There's the other one that's maybe not as specific to small business, but it is Planner. If you think about our past, Microsoft Project was really for the enterprise with staff that was purely to be project manager, somebody that knew the tool, knew the trade, and would do that for the projects at scale. But with Planner, it's kind of for anyone. It's easy to manage Teams tasks. And if you're in Planner, if you're adapting and using now Microsoft Teams, there's an element of Planner called Tasks in Teams. But it really is built for that somebody who hasn't done project management, has tasks to assign, and will do that in an ad hoc fashion or a programmable fashion. It's a really easy tool, and I think really, really a nice offering to the small business. The last one, I'll be curious if you've ever used it, because I know you do a little bit more driving than me. I think it's been more life than work. But there's the one offering called Mile IQ. And if you manage a set of cars, a set of people, drivers, around town, long distance, short distances, being able to, have them track their receipts, how many miles are on each vehicle, it's a really unique tool. And it is something that is targeted for a small fleet of people that are having to track their mileage. So it's a really nice way for them to augment their systems, but without having to build a small, unique tool, just as part of the offering.
Yeah, there are so many of these productivity applets, if you will, to help organize a small group. Because if you're looking at, again, 10,000 people all contributing to the same effort, you need to do some fairly sophisticated modeling and capture of who's doing what and how the billing is working and all of that. And you have people who are dedicated just to the care and feeding and the construction of those systems. Small businesses don't have the luxury of having people who are dedicated to it. So being able to get these one-stop apps that you can plug into Teams, being able to get everyone, not just connected, but to create that sort of hive mind of being able to look around and see what other people are working on and where they're stuck and being able to reassign work. I'm jealous of people who are doing startups now compared to where it would have been years ago.
Yeah. And I think the one maybe last point we can make before we talk with John is the offering that we have for small and medium businesses is not a small and medium offering. In addition to some of those applets that we talked about, they do get the full bread and butter of what we think of Office 365, SharePoint and OneDrive for cloud storage, Teams for chat, calls and meeting, Outlook for email and calendar. The list goes on, full Office. It is not a small offering, and it's not at all limited by scale either. If you have a lot of content to track, whether it's documents or list type data, if you've got a lot of communications going in and out, a lot of meetings that you're scheduling, there's no limit to the scale. It is to meet their business at a price point that is very targeted to small and medium businesses. But the offering is by no means, at least from my perspective, and I think we'll hear from John, it's not a limited offering because they are small or medium.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot that I think we're going to hear about from John today. It's probably been enough back and forth between you and I. Let's look forward to bringing John Orton in, our director of Microsoft 365 marketing, who focuses on small and medium business, coming up next.
So now, in our presence in this virtual space, we're going to be talking with Director of Microsoft 365 Marketing focused on the small and medium-sided businesses, John Orton. John, welcome to the IntraZone.
Hey, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
So we want to first give everybody a little bit of a back view of where did John come from and then really focus on what you focus on now. John and I were peers a long time ago before Office 365 was called Office 365. And I've always thought of John in my past as being my SharePoint peer in Exchange. So your Exchange background has led you to where, John? How did you get to where you are now?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I've been at Microsoft 14 years, and my first part of my career was deep in the world of Exchange. I joined right before Exchange Server 2007 public beta. Had some good times setting up a demo where we took a sledgehammer to a server to demonstrate new disaster recovery stuff, and I'd go to the SharePoint conferences to scout them out and figure out what we could bring over to the Exchange conferences. And then since then, been in a variety of roles, as from BPOS to Office 365, security, a little bit of Outlook.com, Outlook Mobile, Yammer, and then the last few years focusing on small and medium business.
Chris knows this, at the onset of where does everything stem from, and this may be a really self-centered approach to thinking about Microsoft 365, but it really does feel true when you look at a lot of things that there are so many services that stem from SharePoint and Exchange, even if they don't carry that name forward. I'll bet there's a lot of those shining moments where it's like, oh, I remember that as an Exchange service now is X.
I remember once or twice I got over to MEC, the Microsoft Exchange Conference, as sort of the token SharePoint representative. And it was always great to see this similar but also very different community. I would go to MEC and I would look at the community that had grown up around Exchange and the amount of Tony Redmond-based ribbing that would go on at those events and realize, like, oh my goodness, we in the SharePoint community, we take ourselves so seriously. We have so much to learn.
Yeah, there's some, I think there was something about the history and kind of the size of that community. We always got compared to the SharePoint community as being tiny by comparison in terms of number of attendees. But one of the upsides is both the product team, the MVP and partner community, and then even some of our toughest critics like Tony Redmond and folks like Paul Robichaux all knew each other pretty well. And we were all on the journey together to bring business email to customers and bring customers to the cloud and so on.
I just remember being at the speaker dinner and they were giving out speaker awards. And it was the fastest time to self-promotion in a session, Tony Redmond not included. Go. Tony, if you're listening, we love you. We love you.
Absolutely. We've chatted with Tony many times over the years, and we're in fact on his podcast one time. So, but let's take that maybe as where we want to go with this episode in terms of you had mentioned that MEC oftentimes a little smaller than SPC, but the impact and the value, of course, were immeasurable no matter which, especially when you think of the audience or the intention. A lot of where we focus on this show, we often focus around enterprise, and enterprise meaning, very, very large customers, but, even mid-range customers in terms of size aren't that small, especially when it comes to why would you need Microsoft 365? But of equal interest are those businesses with 1 to 25 people that often in how they build out their workforce, inclusive of vendors and partners in that external user motion. So they really do expand beyond just 25 people at the max. Can you help us define small and medium business, to understand their structure, what their specific needs are, anything that helps paint a picture of what do we mean when we talk about small to medium businesses?
Well, it's really smart to start off any discussion about small and medium business by defining what you mean, because every company has a different size range when they're talking about small and medium business. Some, we'll describe it as 1 to 100 employees, 1 to 1,000. For Microsoft and from my team's perspective, the small and medium business space consists of all organizations with between 1 and 300 employees. And if you're familiar with our Microsoft 365 subscriptions, they have a 300-person cap on our offerings in that space that we have some purpose-built packages and special pricing for those kind of businesses. Within that, we divide that 1 to 300 employee type range of customers into the small and the medium based on whether they have anyone that does full-time IT in the company. So small meaning that whoever is looking after IT has a different or other jobs. Medium meaning they've got at least one IT person. or sometimes more. And there's actually no magic number where that happens. We often draw the line at 25 employees and under being the small. What those small businesses have in common is because there is no one looking after IT full time, they often rely on IT services partners when something comes up they can't handle. It could be networking, it could be desktop and hardware support. Occasionally have customers that decide to fully outsource things and have a partner be their IT department. But a lot of them take a do-it-yourself approach. They do what they can, and they bring in a partner for help when they get in over their heads. Kind of like me and my home maintenance or yard maintenance approach. I'm spending a lot of time at Home Depot, but I'll bring in someone that knows what they're doing when I reach a point that my skills are inadequate, which is often.
I was just going to say, I'm making some fair assumptions that you are in the realm of being a Renaissance man. So that threshold of when you need somebody might be a little bit different than what mine is, which is right away.
My partner's son, Brendan, just started working at the Home Depot 2 weeks ago. And in training, they were told to they divide their customers into three bases. They're the professionals, the professional contractors. There's the do-it-yourselfers. And there's the, please someone do this for me. I very much line up with the latter group there.
Yeah, and it's the exact same story with these businesses and IT. And people know how deep they want to get and how much of their time they want to spend getting smart about IT. It can save you some money if you do it yourself, but a lot of these people just want to focus on their businesses. Just a quick note on the medium-sized businesses that have, one or a couple IT people. The folks we talk to are similar in many respects to IT folks at in enterprise or education, larger companies. I think what's different is they have to spread themselves across such a surface area. So they're doing everything from end user support on the desktop to managing email to managing antivirus and security, everything in between. You'll often hear them talk about their job as like, I look after anything that plugs in, including the lights sometimes, or anything with an electron. It's just impossible for them to go deep across all that set of things. So they really crave simplicity and in the IT products they work on.
I know from your days back with Exchange Online and what Chris and I, sort of are still within is that value to maybe from our customers and analysts of the ability to delegate administration. And if you look at it from the full tenant perspective, delegating who can do licensing administration, who can administer SharePoint, who can administer Teams. And, usually there's an assumption that that's multiple people, but to hear what you say and what you can imagine when you don't have as many people to delegate to is that there are going to be, 1 to 2 or maybe even just only one person that's going to wear many hats. And to keep it simple, because there certainly is complexity just in the number of things that they would then be required to do is really important to take into consideration.
While it's true that definitely on the S side of the SMB realm, you're not typically going to see a dedicated IT person. The thing that I also filter that through is if you look at where the technology has gone and kind of some of the ease of use things with consumerization, and you look at the power of things like Power Platform and, your ability to use and combine the tools to bring people together from around the world to collaborate on a live list or a Teams meeting. These are things that would have been like beyond the imagination of MIT computer science doctorates 30 years ago. And, I think that in some ways there may not be a single IT person, but increasingly everyone is in part their own IT person.
Yeah, it's true. And the IT people can also focus on things that the employees in the company actually touch and benefit from instead of spending so much time on things in the server room or the back office. They're keeping the lights on, keeping things patched and tending servers and things, whereas now they're able to do things that help people get their jobs done more efficiently, help the company communicate, and so on.
John, before we get into really understanding the different use cases and getting a little bit more talking about the technical offerings for Microsoft 365, with where we're at currently in the pandemic and knowing that COVID has hit a lot of different companies in different proportions and in different ways, but specific to small and medium businesses, there must have been initially and most likely still an added strain to everything you've already shared, but plus. What was our initial response based on some of the ease of pain we wanted to offer, if we could? May have been initially in the response and may still be sustaining now, but can you maybe share a little bit of insight around for small and medium businesses and the impact of COVID and what Microsoft has done?
COVID-19 has certainly affected us all, but not affected us all equally. That's certainly true among small businesses. Those are among the most disrupted of the folks out there. Many found themselves pretty ill-equipped to deal with the changes that came so fast. I'm remembering a partner from a talent agency that represents actors, saying, hey, we've totally ground to a halt. These restaurant owners, similar story, either huge drop in their business or kind of having to shut down while they figured out what they were going to do. In some industries, they were less affected. I remember talking to a lady that manages retirement plan paperwork and record keeping. She said, hey, I've got more work than ever because companies are making changes to their retirement plans in response to this. So uneven for sure, but definitely a time where these businesses had to adjust and cope with huge changes to their business. I just want to pause and recognize the IT services partners who supported them during this time. I think they're among the unsung heroes of COVID because they were in there switching businesses to work from home, setting them up for remote access, expanding VPN connections, and so on. So those businesses that were lucky enough to be working with a good partner certainly were in better shape than those that weren't or didn't reach out for that help. But in terms of what Microsoft was trying to do to help out during this period, we were trying to focus on two things. One is getting those businesses the tools they needed to shift their businesses to remote work, and then information on how they could do that effectively. So at the time, we had an offer that they could get 6 months free of our business basic offering that includes Teams, Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive. That's been, phased out as the clock has moved forward on COVID. We have a free version of Teams that's available for the very smallest businesses to help them do video conferencing and remote work. For information, we started up a SMB-focused COVID portal, some material there on how to do remote work and how to secure remote work. There's a secure remote work kit for partners and IT folks to help understand the additional risks that come when your workforce is no longer all working in the same building, but is scattered and working on home and personal devices and so on. So we continue to try and help out on the helping educate and inform people on the best way to do their technology during these times.
One thing I thought of when I was just hearing you describe both our response and the call out to a partner in the IT that helped at the scale that I really can't even imagine. I know we've covered just on this show that focus in hearing about the spike in the service, just the sheer numbers of magnitude, pre-COVID and now during COVID. It really hasn't leveled off just from a use perspective, that spike of initial turn to the service. But I can imagine that is not only a spike in the service, but a learning curve for those dedicated IT or those partners that stepped up. And I didn't really think about it in those terms until you painted the picture that not only putting out information, but having the community step in and really take hold of probably a significant number of people that were all of a sudden turning to not just the service, but of a new way of doing business that just was really hard to grapple with. Hopefully it's mellowed out, but we'll make sure to have links to anything that you think is still relevant. We'll include, if that's helpful to anybody, listening to the show, we'll make sure to put that in the show notes.
Yeah, these IT folks that stepped in to help out, plenty of stories of very late nights and long weekends in March and April to help these businesses keep going. And it was technology that made it happen. So
I think we'd like to broaden the conversation to, that small and medium business market, remembering that, we, I think, over-index sometimes on enterprise because there's so much impressiveness, for lack of a better word, when you say, oh, we're rolling out a new product for 500,000 people today. But there's absolutely great agility, nimbleness, and insight that we can get from the solutions that we bring out to that marketplace. Could you kind of share a little bit of your thinking about, what is the value of Microsoft 365 to the typical small business?
The needs of the employees in these smaller businesses are in many ways the same as employees in a 10,000, even 100,000 person company when it comes to organizing information, communicating with people, collaborating to get things done. What's different is in the past, the systems and the technology rolled out by businesses that are lucky enough to have large IT departments or large wallets to bring in partner to implement. I'm thinking back to the server days, and collaborate effectively has been beyond them. So I remember as we went through this shift to the cloud, how I'd be familiar with the largest enterprises rolling out an environment where you had Exchange and SharePoint and all that wired up so that everything works together in the way that engineering folks at Microsoft has designed it. And it was hard work, doable, but it required expertise and care, a lot of complexities there and a lot of costs. And then suddenly, because my world was Exchange, you could get a fully functional Exchange environment for $10 per user per month. And then it dropped to $5, and then it dropped to $4 per user per month in those, the first year or two as things got scaled up. And we thought, this is crazy value for a 2-person company could get this and pay, $8 a month for 2 Exchange mailboxes with calendaring and all those enterprise features that they would use. And I remember talking to the analysts at Gartner about this and just marveling at how the world was changing, and that one of the biggest beneficiaries of that change were these small and mid-sized businesses who wouldn't have even walked at all down that road toward a full suite of collaboration and communication tools. And so that's been awesome to see. I think that when people ask, what does Microsoft have to offer them? I like to show them because I'm familiar with these tools in my workday and the way that everything works together, how you could strike up a conversation via chat, and you can escalate that to a voice call or a full video call. You could record a conversation for reference after a meeting's done. You can have OneNote open to keep track of the follow-ups, and these things that just kind of come naturally in the flow of work any size business can have. So that's the value. Each business will use that stuff in a different way. Often in the smaller businesses, they're doing more collaboration with people outside the walls of their company than a corporate marketing focused job like mine and Microsoft would. But they still have the need to communicate at high fidelity, to track their work, to follow up, to produce documents that are clear and look great. And the technology has just evolved to make that easier than it ever was before.
When I think of the portfolio that we offer, and I blankly think, Microsoft 365 has a lot of different applications for working with mail and calendaring, for meetings and calling, for collaboration on content, and a whole bunch of, other things. And we know these apps certainly, kind of in our repertoire. And with our enterprise hat on, we think, well, that's what they get. And I don't think it's a shortage of the applications and capabilities that our small and medium businesses get. And to your statement, there is, a plethora that is offered to them. Besides email calendaring and what it sounds in the terms of use of Teams, what do you think of in the realm of content that you hear, a lot, either whether they're working with external users on documents or they're working, with internal communications, even if it is common, I don't know if that's within Teams or lists or anything that might be in that realm of content. How would you describe what they're using based on what you hear in your conversations or the way that we're making the apps and services available to them that you see them consuming?
I'm going to talk mostly of the small part, the SMB, for a moment here. Traditionally, that crowd has figured out amazing ways to use Excel, for example, kind of our core traditional office apps, to run their business and organize things. So we see them doing customer management and tracking who their customers are and their interactions with those customers and things like that. Obviously, financial information and projections and a lot of operations detail, just using Word, Excel, and to a lesser extent, PowerPoint. So I think that's where a lot of these businesses have been focused. When they think of Microsoft, aside from their Windows machine, they're probably thinking of Office. And when they think of Office, they think of Excel and Word at the small end of this market. But increasingly what's happened is, first of all, the email is a critical tool, of course. And so they recognize that a business class email, that Microsoft has a great offering there. And so in BPOS, Office 365, and now Microsoft 365 throughout that transition, it's been like Office apps and then email. But what's happening is once they're in the suite, they begin to discover other things like Planner being a lightweight tool for task and managing projects. They'll discover that and be amazed at what they can do. Even apps like Bookings, which was designed specifically originally for small businesses and now is quite popular in education and even larger businesses to allow self-service booking by outsiders, customers, etc. And kind of all these small delighters, even something like Forms, starts to light up. But, in my opinion, when it comes to content, I know that your audience really cares about content and even intranet and portal space and OneDrive and SharePoint. We actually started asking as a standard question in our interviews, what are you doing for file storage and sharing? And then do you have any sort of intranet or intranet portal? And so we've probably asked about 100 customers in the last year. And as you might expect, a fair amount of the smaller businesses reply with something to the effect of intro what? Or, they'll say, no, nothing like that. But I've been surprised by what pops up there. We've got ophthalmologist group, a credit union, a carpet and linoleum company. I was going kind of back through my notes on this, legal services firm, all of those that had some form of a portal, an intranet, a place where people could go to find documents, policies, procedures, new employee onboarding, training, key documents. And generally the way that happens is they're stepping up from an environment where they came from a file server on location. And they see that's a better way to, as the files move into the cloud, into SharePoint, the need to gather links in one place and solve the main problem, which is it's hard for these people to find stuff. And the portal can be a great way. But I think the biggest business opportunity or opportunity to transform business in a lot of cases is just getting rid of those file servers and doing something better in SharePoint, in OneDrive. Because a shocking amount of very, very small businesses still have these. I was at a garage door installation company that a friend owns. They've got 4 people that work there. They've got a server in the back, and it's just a desktop tower that's been there for 10 years, but they still access files, in one of those shares. And there's a big opportunity there to get those files to the cloud and unlock better ways of working together.
So this might be just a little bit of a sidestep, but this was about 2 years ago. I was getting an eye exam in the local store that's just down the street. They have 3 stores total, and 2 of them are on the east side, and 1 is in Seattle, so not too far from the same region. And it was at the time they had just moved to the cloud, and the conversation came up because the technician asked, what do you do? And I just, explained Microsoft, and then I said the word SharePoint, and I usually expect the conversation to grind to a halt or what? But they said, SharePoint? Oh my God, let me show you something. And they had just moved to the cloud. Again, 3 stores. I don't know exactly how many people total, but I would guess somewhere in the realm of 20 to 30 people. And that they had hired out a partner for IT that had just stood up an instance of, at that time, Office 365. And she showed me, without exposing anything, said, well, here's where we store some of our data with what's in stock and what are some of the common things that we're stocking in all 3 stores. And it was a SharePoint site. And it was really interesting because she talked about the old SharePoint. She wouldn't go anywhere close to it. But now it's just something she fires up a browser and feels comfortable in. And of course, it was a fun win for the SharePoint guy. But at the same time, hearing somebody who clearly knew nothing about SharePoint before and is able to get what they need to get done. It was a little bit more than a file server. It wasn't quite a full intranet, but it was a great use of SharePoint and something that they were able to lock in on.
And that's often what it takes is someone who knows technology better than them, showing them what's possible. They're just a few steps away from, in many cases, using what they're already paying for in a suite, and they just need a helping hand to show them what's possible.
Our audience loves tips and tricks. You're in a position where you get to experience and hear so much from our smaller size customers about, what works best, where should they start, or if they're already mature, like what's the secret tool they have access to that most organizations don't even think of trying. Would love to get your perspective on what works really well with small businesses.
There's 2 themes that I think are consistent across all the small businesses that I hear from. And so I think any attempt to help a small business technology-wise has to begin from a understanding of these facts about them. And one is that there's going to be cost consciousness, unless it's like a 15-person hedge fund or something. In many cases, this is the owner of the business that's making the call here. The dollars are effectively coming directly out of their pocket and into any technology spend, whether it's a project they're paying for or ongoing subscription. For some of these companies, depending on the stage of their business, it might be a matter of business survival, how they're managing that cash. So compared to enterprises, they do tend to have their eye on the dollar. And then the other is concern about simplicity. And because IT is not their job, or even in midsize where IT is their job, but they're the only person there, or they're one of two or three for a decent sized company, they're short on time. And so their biggest need is for their technology to help rather than hinder their ability to get things done. And so that's the backdrop picture I would paint here. Now, against that backdrop, there's great stories that you can tell about how their world can get better. What I call the sweet pitch is what I often end up talking to them about, which is, look, you can, first of all, there may be a chance to actually save money by buying things in a discounted suite. In Microsoft's SMB offerings, it's the enterprise technology. It's at a special price for these smaller customers, and they can often get rid of point solutions for everything from antivirus to cloud file storage as part of that solution. But they can also save time because of the simplicity there. So if I'm talking to them about the business benefits of moving files to the cloud, I think that's ripe territory right now. With COVID and the sudden shift to work from home, you've got many of these businesses recognizing that having files in a server at their office is not the best place for those to be, for collaboration, for access, for flaky VPN connection reasons. And so I think there's business opportunity to talk to them about the advantages of having files in the cloud and showing them. But again, against the backdrop of you don't have to maintain or worry about or pay for backup of an on-premises server. And this is going to be much simpler for you because whether your people are at the office or at home, they can get to their files. So that's the biggest tip I have, whether you're someone who does IT as a partner helping out these businesses, or as many of you will be familiar with, you've got a friend, a brother-in-law, someone who is reaching out because they want kind of unofficial advice or assistance. That's what you can do to help, is explain how other businesses are using these technologies to work in a way that can be done from anywhere, to work in a way that's more collaborative than email and phone calls or even paper, to show them what's possible with these tools and custom apps and Power Platform and all those sort of things, recognizing that their ability to pay is limited. And by the way, I'll ask you a quiz question. Which do you think is stronger out of those two desires? The desire to save money or the desire to save time through simplicity when it comes to tech products?
I would guess it would be more around saving time because, you had mentioned earlier, and I'm just taking a stab here, that going into the back-end server room and managing the server and the blinking lights of the server versus keeping the lights on. Keeping the lights on, if you translate that into doing more business value, less time patching servers, I would imagine that there is the savings of time that really can get them to focus on the business, not on the tech.
Yeah, I would say it's probably to save space since they're small businesses and they don't have a lot of... no, I'm kidding. Probably time would be my guess.
How'd we do?
Well, I'm not sure of the right answer to this, but I would tend to agree with you there. In many cases, the best use of their time is focusing on their business. And so often they're underneath an amount of daily and weekly tasks. They don't have time to think strategically and get above that. Mm-hmm. And so I think that the time is actually their more precious resource than money. One anecdote, along these lines is I am shocked and dismayed how many people I find that are Office 365, Microsoft 365 subscribers. So they own OneDrive and SharePoint and other tools. We find they're still paying for a Dropbox subscription. Same story for a Zoom subscription. And we'll often point this out and say, hey, did you know that you got a terabyte of OneDrive storage per person in your company. You could get rid of that monthly bill. Wouldn't it be great? And how many people kind of shrug their shoulders and they're like, well, but it's working for us. And as long as it keeps working, like they don't want to spend the switching cost time, even if it saves them money each month. So that's a signal to me that they'll, if their tech's working, they'll just stick with it because they can't afford that loss of time. So it's an interesting situation.
I'm going to throw one tip or trick back to you, and you tell us if this might land with a small or medium business. There is the reality of any transition is going to feel like it's heavy lifting, and there may be some cost associated to it. But for the one scenario where you're thinking about a file server or they're already using another third-party storage provider, that switch over, we have a very distinct offering now. And to be frank, we acquired a company called Mover, and Mover's sole focus is helping people migrate to Microsoft 365. And that could be directly to OneDrive. It could be into SharePoint for broader use Teams scenarios, or directly into Teams because it's all backed by SharePoint. But the tip is Mover is a free offering to any Office 365 customer. You literally sign in with your credentials. And let's say your scenario was they are using Dropbox and they just don't want to switch over. They don't have time to do it. There is now a more programmatic way to move, and Dropbox being one of those third-party providers that we support moving from. But even from on-premises, we have tools and ways to help. This gets people through that migration process, because the value of once it's in one place, you're paying a little bit less if you can drop a vendor or two. The move to get to there is just a matter of time, but once in place, you have the value of, and that's where we hopefully would go on and on about what you can now do with your files or your content. Tip back to you, we've got an offering that would be available to small and medium businesses to help them move their files into Microsoft 365, with then the upside to be, describing what it is that they can now do.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because in many cases, the perceived amount of complexity of switching to something else, they're thinking it's some huge, risky, difficult process. And when in actuality, it's not that hard. We see this actually in our interviews, which research vendors conduct in teams, and we'll get there like, oh, that was actually pretty easy and intuitive to join and to use this. And I didn't even realize this was part of my subscription, but now I know. That wasn't that hard.
Yeah.
Because they can see it in just in a minute, right?
But it is interesting. I mean, the idea of a cost structure. I remember years ago, I was working with a nonprofit, which admittedly has some different perceptions, and they dealt with, they operated homeless shelters. There was a piece of software which would automate every piece of checking guests in and registrations and state mandated reporting, all these sorts of things. And I think the software was something like $1,500, would let 50 people use this across the board. And they looked at it in terms of, well, that's, at the time, that's like the cost of 5 licenses of Office. Is it 5 times better than Microsoft Office? And it's interesting that, there are some cost increments that people are neutral to, but larger expenditures, I do recognize smaller businesses, look at those and they bat more than one eye. And we have to be mindful of that, I think, in how we introduce innovation to the market.
John, I know we covered a ton. So if there was a central location that can reiterate a lot of what you stated, that can be something that can be publicly accessed, where do you send people to learn whether they are supporting a small or medium-sized business as a partner, or are they themselves having already had investments in Microsoft 365 and want to see what they can do next, or are thinking about a move to the cloud? Where would you send them, and what are some of the main things that we can call out and make sure to have in our show notes?
Well, if it is a small business, not IT savvy, I'll often direct them to just search on Microsoft 365 for business. Those search results will take them into the web pages that show the 3 different subscription plans, what's in them, and some really solid introductory level material. If I'm talking to people that know IT, like your audience, I'll direct them to aka.ms SMBTC. So that's a shortcut to the SMB section of the technical community. And there we have a blog where we post about things relevant in small and medium business, and a place to ask questions and have discussion there. So that's a great place to go.
Great. I will put that in the show notes. I'll kind of put a cheat link into getting to the medium business plans so that people can start to explore those. But want to say thank you for your time. Thanks for joining us on the Intrazone and sharing both your exchange online way back into the way back of history, but obviously to everything that you now focus on in supporting small and medium businesses. So thank you for your time.
Glad to come. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Up next on the Intrazone, frequently asked questions, or FAQs. These are questions that we've heard about in our journeys here on the Intrazone, connecting to customers and partners, that we want to share what we've been talking about that's been top of mind for us recently. So, Mark, what's a question that you've been asked most recently about Microsoft 365?
As we are currently and still rolling out Microsoft lists, there are components that haven't yet shipped. Some people have seen it in Teams. Some people are just getting the Lists app in Microsoft 365. But one of the new components that we did note is starting to roll out are two views. One is the calendar view and one is the gallery view. And the most of the questions I'm getting are around the calendar view. Where do I find the calendar view? And the reason why I think we're getting the question is it's not something you just see. It's something you actually create. So if you go and you look for gallery view, it's right there. You can't miss it. When it's available, you'll see it. But with calendar view, the answer to the question is, A, you might not have it yet, but it is now rolling out. If you do have it, you have to go into a list view and choose create new view. And when you're creating the new view, you'll see that you have the choice to make it a calendar, which is really to choose the skin of a calendar that will make it look like a calendar, just like it sounds like. The next step is you choose which column has date information that you want to trigger as how it then shows up on the calendar view. You give it a name and click create, and then you'll see it in your list of custom views that you've created. So that open question, where can I find calendar view, is you have to create it. Once it's created, it'll be available to those people that are members of your list. Chris, what is your FAQ this week?
So one question I've been getting asked a lot recently, we've had a number of virtual events that we've organized both externally as well as internally. And we get asked a lot, is there a way to be able to, during a meeting, to take 2 or 3 people off to the side to have a separate side meeting with them? And the great answer is that is finally coming to Microsoft Teams with breakout rooms. It is currently in rollout. So I believe we're scheduled to finish the rollout by the end of November, but Teams breakout rooms provides a way in the middle of the meeting, again, to be able to step outside and continue a dialogue with 2 or 3 people and then be able to bring that conversation back into the main line of the meeting. So it's definitely something that's been top of mind for us. We know it's been top of mind for many of our customers, and we really look forward to hearing your feedback as we roll this feature out into full general availability.
And I'll just put a little plug. I can't wait to use this at a next, whether it's a big or small event, because I can imagine if we're still in this virtual space and you're inviting people in to talk about multiple topics, you might want to have the open room that is sort of like the front information booth, where you have all of your stanchions where people can go then to different topics. Have a welcoming crew. What are you here to talk about? What questions do you have? And then to be able to channel them as if you're pointing across the booth saying, oh yeah, you want to go talk to those people over there. I really wanted that for Ignite. And I think breakout rooms will give us something like that during events. Chris, speaking of FAQs, there's a small little plug, but it's a big one because it's something that is dear to our hearts, which is making awareness of our roadmap and progress. There's a show that covers questions broader than SharePoint, OneDrive, and all the stuff that we focus on, but of all Microsoft 365 news and features, appropriately called What's New with Microsoft 365. Have you heard about this show, Chris?
I have not. Please tell me more.
Well, I will. It is a monthly video series hosted on the Microsoft 365's YouTube channel that showcases updates that are relevant for admins, IT pros, or just anybody that's generally interested in RIT. And it is, of course, focused on all sizes of business. So if there is a new specific feature for small and medium business, for instance, they would have it on their show. To give it a little bit more insight, recent topics include how to set up workspaces in Outlook, that new capability that came to Outlook. Not only is it awareness of what, but it is also a how. There's the availability of forms in Office Mobile, which is, I think, close to your old heart for what you used to manage. So pretty cool. And there's some new management capabilities for Microsoft Defender Antivirus. And of course, a lot more. Every month, tons of things that they cover. The show features both highlights of new features, interviews with colleagues, and it's a lot of similar to what we do for the Roadmap Pit Stop, but it covers all of Microsoft 365. And it's a show that we wanted to highlight because sometimes our content is in there, a lot of our peers' content in there. But it really is that other effort that's really that foot forward for good change management. So we want to encourage everybody to subscribe to the show via the Microsoft 365 YouTube channel by going to aka.ms/subscribe to M365. We'll put that link in the show notes. You'll get a notification anytime a new video comes out. They're very engaging, short and to the point, but it really puts a spotlight on what's new in Microsoft 365 this month.
Up next on the IntroZone, events. With a more connected world and so many events moving online, there's just more and more things that we can introduce to you here on the IntroZone. One event which is coming up imminently is the Microsoft 365 Chicago event. That's coming up on November 13th, 2020. You can learn more at m365chicago.com.
Chris, I know November is pretty busy. We also have a couple of external third-party events. There's the Document Strategy Forum. This one might be like right in the heart of where SharePoint Syntax might have a presence. That is going to be November 9th through the 10th. If you want to learn more about document strategy, there's a great open forum for learning from people that know that space really well. And I'll have to ask because I don't know. Chris, do you have any part of the Document Strategy Forum?
Yeah, Microsoft is sponsoring that, and I'm participating in a thought leadership panel basically on the future of what documents are and how organizations should think about turning content into manageable knowledge throughout its life cycle. So something that's obviously near and dear to my heart. It's also a topic that's going to come up a little bit later this month at KM World 2020. That's running November 16th to 19th. Microsoft is also sponsoring. Naomi Moneypenny from our engineering team will be presenting, as well as a couple of other resources from around Microsoft, the world of search, the world of Cortex. I'll probably pop up for a few minutes here and there.
And then just within that same period of time, November 17th through the 18th, is the Experts Conference 2020 by our partners at Quest. And this is a couple of days of in-depth training on hybrid Active Directory security, Office 365 migration and modernization, and all the things that you can get through keynotes and sessions. It's a great lineup of people. We'll have a link in the show notes. You can see who the speakers are. And you know what, Chris? I'm looking at this and I see a very, very familiar face. Maybe an older title, because I think you now have a new title, but it looks like you might have a keynote at the Quest event.
I'm doing the second keynote. Greg Taylor from our Outlook team is doing the lead keynote for Quest. Some of you know I used to be the general manager of the SharePoint business at Quest before we kind of grew up into Dell. So it's always fun to be able to reconnect with many of my old colleagues and customers back from there, and they're a great partner to us. That's not all. We have more events as we get into December coming up.
Yeah, we've got GlobalCon 4. So if you know by name, if you've attended GlobalCon 1 through 3, these are pretty broad events, and sometimes they are split over multiple days. They've been running what are called Turbo Tuesdays, and you would be able to have a very dedicated day on a certain topic. GlobalCon for December 1st through the 4th will be a pretty broad agenda with a couple of leading overview sessions each day, diving into everything you can think of: Microsoft 365, SharePoint, Yammer, OneDrive, the Power Platform for developers, for IT. They always put on a great conference. It's all virtual, but they always have the subject matter experts live for Q&A during the sessions. It's a very active number of days. I'll be taking part in it, and I really can't wait to plug in with that. It's a very, very, as the name implies, global event as far as time zones, and global event in terms of speakers and attendees. It's a really great event.
Microsoft 365 Collab Conference. That's coming up December 9th through 11th. You can learn more at virtual.m365conf.com.
This one is the one that picks up from the SharePoint conference team. Again, a third-party team that we worked with, but they started to advertise this new virtual event, which will be December 9th through the 11th. And to round out events, something that I'm really pleased to see, it's a little something different. Not necessarily that we haven't seen other teams do this, but the SharePoint Fest team is now doing only virtual workshops. These are often 1 to 2 day workshops with people that you know and have recognized as great community trainers. And this is ongoing between November and January. If you look at their calendar, you can join Microsoft team members and MVPs to learn about SharePoint, OneDrive, Power BI, Microsoft Teams, Microsoft Lists. Oh, look at that, Microsoft List ones. They're great virtual events, lots of great topics, easy to plug into, and is one of those offerings that's not just a session here or there. It's really, 4 to 8 hours deep on a topic that you might want to get a little bit more ingrained in. So a lot of events, a lot of things that are happening. Plug in. We'll have links and all the dates listed in the show notes, and hopefully connect with those people that you want to connect with around the world, network, be a part of the community. But of course, top of mind, get the training that you need so you can use the technology to the best of what is available.
Well, once again, that's it. Another perfectly fine episode of the Intrazone. We'd like to thank you all for listening. And of course, we really want to thank John Orton for joining us today. We'll put links to everything we talked about and more into our show notes.
Check out the show page at aka.ms/the Intrazone.
And if you're curious about other Microsoft shows, because there are other Microsoft shows, visit us at aka.ms/Microsoft/podcasts and on the adoption.microsoft.com site to discover a new podcast from Microsoft today.
You can always email us. Yes, email still exists at theintrazone@microsoft.com or on Twitter at SharePoint, at mcashman, and at cmcnulty2000.
Word of mouth is one of the most powerful ways people learn about new podcasts. So if you enjoy this show, help us reach more people. Tell someone, share that SharePoint love, and subscribe at your local hockey rink or wherever you get your podcasts.
I can't wait until our Seattle team opens up and then we can really layer in and I can join you on all your sports references. But until then, we are your hosts, Mark Cashman and Chris McNulty, and you've been listening to The Intrazone, a show about the Microsoft 365 intelligent big and small intranet.